Why would my wife be afraid of a box of old photographs? My son asked. And for the first time in nearly 8 years, I heard doubt in his voice instead of certainty. The question hung in the air between us like something fragile, something that could break apart an entire family if handled the wrong way. I was standing in the doorway of my garage when Ethan lifted a dusty cardboard box from the highest shelf. The afternoon sun streamed through the open garage door, catching the dust floating around him. It was an ordinary Saturday in late September, the kind of day when neighbors trimmed hedges, washed their cars, and waved politely from across the street. Nothing about it felt extraordinary. And yet, looking back now, that was the day everything changed. "Mom, what is this?" Ethan asked. His voice sounded casual, but I noticed the way Vanessa immediately stopped sorting decorations beside him. She froze. Just for a second. Most people would have missed it. I didn't. After years of being quietly pushed to the edge of my own family, I had become very good at noticing small things. I glanced toward the box. My stomach tightened. I recognized it instantly. It had been sitting on that shelf for more than 20 years. I hadn't opened it in over a decade. "Just old photographs," I said. "Nothing important." Vanessa stood up so quickly that a stack of storage bins rattled beside her. "We should probably finish organizing the garage," she said. "We still have errands to run." Ethan looked at her, then back at the box. "It'll only take a minute." A minute. Funny how entire lives can change in less time than that. I wiped my hands on my gardening gloves and watched as he peeled back the faded tape. My heart wasn't racing. It should have been, but strangely it wasn't. Maybe because I had spent years carrying disappointments. Years watching my son slowly drift away from me. Years listening to conversations grow shorter. Visits become rarer. Holidays become complicated. At first, I blamed adulthood. Then marriage. Then distance. Eventually, I stopped searching for explanations. People tell you that growing older teaches acceptance. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it simply teaches silence. Ethan lifted the first photograph from the box. His eyebrows narrowed. "I remember this house," he said quietly. The picture showed a small white rental home we had lived in when he was 10. The roof leaked every spring. The furnace barely worked during Ohio winters. I smiled faintly. "You hated that place." I remember being embarrassed by it. Most kids would have been. Vanessa stepped closer. "Those are just old pictures, Ethan." Again, that tiny note in her voice. Too quick. Too eager. Ethan noticed it this time. I could tell. He slowly reached deeper into the box. More photographs. More memories. More pieces of a story nobody had talked about in years. His expression changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. A small crease between his eyes. A longer pause before speaking. The beginning of a question he hadn't fully formed yet. Then he pulled out another photograph and stared at it longer than the others. Vanessa went pale. Not frightened. Not angry. Just suddenly uncomfortable. The way someone looks when a locked door begins to open. Ethan turned the picture over in his hands. "Mom," he said slowly, "why have I never seen these before?" Before I could answer, Vanessa stepped forward and reached for the photograph. That was when my son looked at her instead of me. And for the first time in years, he didn't look convinced. Vanessa forced a smile that did not reach her eyes. "It is getting late," she said. "We can look through old family pictures another time." Ethan did not answer immediately. He was still staring at the photograph in his hand. I recognized at the moment I saw the faded edges. It had been taken outside a grocery store almost 18 years earlier. I was wearing a blue employee vest and standing beside an old sedan that barely ran. Ethan looked at the picture, then at me. "You worked here?" he asked. "For a while," I said. "I do not remember that." "You were 12. He turned the photograph over. There was a date written on the back in black ink. October 2008. Ethan frowned. "That was the year I started private school." I nodded. Neither of us said anything for a few seconds. Some silences feel uncomfortable. Others feel important. This one felt important. Ethan reached into the box again and pulled out another photograph. Then another. In one, I was standing beside stacks of shipping boxes in a warehouse. In another, I was behind the counter of a small diner wearing a name tag. His expression slowly changed. Not because of any single photograph, because of all of them together. Like puzzle pieces forming a picture he had never seen before. "Mom," he said quietly, "how many jobs did you have back then?" I looked toward the open garage door. Across the street, a neighbor was mowing his lawn. The sound drifted through the afternoon air. Ordinary. peaceful, almost strange compared to the tension growing around us. Enough, I said. Ethan gave a small laugh. That is not really an answer. Sometimes I work 2 jobs. Sometimes 3. Vanessa folded her arms. A lot of parents work hard. Yes, I said calmly. They do. Ethan glanced toward her, then back at the photographs. He pulled out a worn envelope tucked beneath a stack of pictures. The seal had yellowed with age. I felt my chest tighten. I had forgotten that envelope was even there. What is this? He asked. Probably nothing important. But even as I said it, I knew it was important. Ethan opened it carefully. Inside were several old receipts and a folded bank statement. He unfolded the paper. His eyes moved across the page, then stopped. Mom. His voice sounded different now. Lower. Slower. This withdrawal was for $22,000. I nodded. Yes. Why? I hesitated. Not because I wanted to hide the answer. Because I had spent years not talking about it. Years convincing myself it no longer mattered. Your tuition deposit, I said. Ethan stared at the paper. My tuition? You got accepted into one of the best schools in the state. The deposit was due within 30 days. I thought Dad paid that. The words landed softly, but they landed. I looked down at my gardening gloves. Your father helped when he could. Ethan said nothing. Vanessa stepped forward. There has to be more to the story than that. For the first time all afternoon, Ethan did not immediately agree with her. He simply looked back into the box. Then he lifted another photograph. This one showed me standing beside a for sale sign in front of my old car. He stared at it for a long moment. Then he slowly turned it over and read the note written on the back. His face became very still. And that was the moment I realized my son had stopped looking for memories. He had started looking for answers. The note on the back of the photograph was written in my own handwriting. The ink had faded slightly over the years, but the words were still clear. Sold the car today. Ethan starts school next month. Worth every mile I walked afterward. Ethan read the sentence twice. Then a third time. The garage seemed unusually quiet. Even the distant sound of lawn mowers and passing cars felt muted somehow. He lowered the photograph and looked at me. You sold your car? He asked. Yes. For my tuition? I gave a small shrug. Partly. His eyes narrowed. Partly. I could see him trying to fit this new information into the story he had carried for years. The story was resisting. The pieces did not match anymore. Vanessa shifted her weight beside him. People make sacrifices for their children all the time. Her tone sounded careful now. Measured. Ethan did not take his eyes off me. How long were you without a car? I thought about it for a moment. Almost 11 months. 11 months? I nodded. The bus stop was about half a mile from the apartment. I walked. He looked stunned. Not because walking half a mile was difficult. Because he had never heard any of this before. Why did nobody tell me? He asked. I smiled faintly. You were busy being a teenager. The truth was more complicated than that. Children rarely see the sacrifices happening around them. And good parents often make sure they never have to. Ethan stared back into the box. His movements had become slower. More deliberate. Like an archaeologist uncovering something fragile. He reached deeper and found a small photo album tucked beneath several envelopes. The cover was cracked with age. I had not seen it in years. When he opened it, a folded receipt slipped onto the garage floor. Vanessa bent quickly as if to pick it up. Ethan reached it first. He unfolded the paper. I recognized it immediately. My stomach tightened. It was from a jewelry store downtown that had closed more than a decade ago. Ethan looked confused. Then he read the item description. Gold wedding band. Gold necklace. Diamond earrings. Sold. The date was less than 2 weeks before his freshman year began. His eyes slowly lifted toward me. Mom. I did not answer right away. Some memories become softer with time. Others stay exactly where they were. Waiting. You sold Grandma's necklace? He asked quietly. I nodded. And your wedding ring? Another nod. Ethan looked back down at the receipt. The silence stretched between us. Vanessa folded her arms tighter. I am sure there were other reasons. Ethan turned toward her. Not sharply. Not angrily. Just enough to make her stop talking. Then he looked at the photo album again. One page after another revealed pieces of a life he barely remembered. Pictures of small apartments. Pictures of me working. Pictures of secondhand furniture. Pictures of birthdays celebrated in tiny kitchens. Nothing dramatic. Nothing extraordinary. Just evidence of years spent trying to build a future for my son. Then Ethan stopped turning pages. his gaze fixed on a photograph near the center of the album. It showed him standing in front of his private school wearing a navy blazer. I stood beside him smiling. The smile looked tired now that I examined it. Beneath the picture was another note written in blue ink. First day, tuition paid, rent overdue, worth it. Ethan swallowed hard. I saw it happen. He carefully closed the album and stared at the cover. Then he looked at me with an expression I had not seen since he was a little boy. Confusion, hurt, and a growing realization that someone had not told him the whole truth. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The late afternoon sunlight stretched across the concrete floor of the garage, casting long shadows beneath the shelves. Ethan sat down on an old folding chair and rested the photo album on his lap. He looked exhausted, not physically, but emotionally, like someone who had spent years reading the same book only to discover half the pages had been missing. Vanessa remained standing. Her expression was calm, but I could see tension in the way she held her shoulders. Ethan opened the album again. This time he was not looking at the photographs themselves. He was studying the details around them. Dates, notes, locations, little pieces of context that transformed ordinary pictures into evidence of a life he barely understood. Why did you keep all this? He finally asked. I looked at the shelves above us. I do not know. Maybe because some memories are difficult to throw away. Ethan nodded slowly. Then he stopped on another page. I recognized it immediately. The photograph showed a tiny apartment kitchen. The wallpaper was peeling near the window. The refrigerator was older than the apartment itself. Ethan stood beside a birthday cake with 14 candles. He smiled at the camera. I stood behind him. Tired, thin, happy. I remember this birthday, he said. You bought me that laptop. I smiled faintly. You needed it for school. Ethan looked at the note attached beneath the picture. His face changed again. The note was short. Worked 6 extra weekend shifts. Finally saved enough. He read it twice. Then looked at me. You worked 6 extra weekends for that computer? Something like that. Mom, why did you never tell me any of this? The question lingered in the air. I thought about all the years between then and now. The graduations, the holidays, the missed phone calls, the growing distance. Because it was never supposed to be your burden, I said quietly. Ethan lowered his eyes. Across from him, Vanessa crossed her arms. Parents help their children, she said. That is normal. Yes, I replied. It is. Ethan remained silent. That silence worried Vanessa more than any argument could have. For years, she had always known what he thought. Now she did not. Ethan turned another page. Then another. The album continued through the years of high school. School events, academic awards, soccer games, family dinners, ordinary moments. Yet now every image carried a different meaning. Every photograph existed beside receipts, notes, and records that told a larger story. A story nobody had explained to him. Then a folded document slipped from the back cover and landed on the floor. Ethan picked it up. It was a property tax statement from nearly 15 years earlier. I immediately remembered it. My stomach tightened. Ethan unfolded the paper. His eyes scanned the numbers. You were behind on payments. I nodded. For a while. Because of school expenses? I did not answer right away. I did not need to. The answer was already sitting in his hands. Ethan stared at the page. Then he looked around the garage. Around the house. The house he had always assumed was stable, comfortable, secure. I never knew things were this hard, he said softly. They were not hard all the time. But sometimes they were. I smiled sadly. Sometimes. Ethan leaned back in the chair and closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them again, something had shifted. He was no longer trying to understand the photographs. He was trying to understand the years that followed. The years when he slowly began believing a version of me that looked nothing like the woman in those pictures. And for the first time, I could see him asking himself the question that mattered most. If these stories were true, then who had convinced him otherwise? The question lingered in the garage long after nobody spoke it aloud. If these stories were true, then who had convinced Ethan they were not? The sunlight had begun to fade outside. The bright afternoon glow was slowly turning gold. Ethan remained in the folding chair with the box beside him. He no longer looked like a man sorting through old family keepsakes. He looked like a man auditing his own memories. One by one, carefully, reluctantly, he reached into the bottom of the box and pulled out a thick envelope held together by a rubber band that had become brittle with age. The band snapped the moment he touched it. Several documents slid across his lap. More receipts, he asked quietly. Probably. Ethan gathered them into a neat stack. Tuition statements, bank withdrawal records, utility bills, loan documents. Nothing dramatic. Just paperwork. Ordinary papers that had survived long enough to tell a story. He picked up the first tuition statement. Then another. Then another. Every payment had been made on time. Every semester. Every year. His eyes moved from page to page. This cannot be right, he said. Vanessa immediately responded. What cannot be right? Ethan held up one of the statements. The payments. What about them? I was always told Dad covered most of these expenses. The garage became quiet again. Vanessa looked away for a moment. Maybe he did. Ethan slowly shook his head. These statements say otherwise. He laid the papers side by side across his knees. For several minutes, nobody spoke. He simply read. Date after date. Payment after payment. Signature after signature. Mine. The same handwriting he had already seen on the backs of the photographs. The same handwriting attached to every sacrifice hidden inside that box. Finally, he looked up. How much did Dad actually contribute? I chose my words carefully. Your father loved you. Ethan nodded. That is not what I asked. I looked down at the concrete floor. He helped when he could. Ethan understood the answer immediately. His shoulders sank slightly. Not because he was disappointed in his father. Because he was realizing how much of the burden had belonged to someone else. Vanessa crossed her arms tighter. People remember things differently. Ethan did not respond. He simply reached for another document. This one stopped him completely. I recognized it before he even unfolded it. It was a loan approval letter from a small credit union that no longer existed. Ethan read the first paragraph, then the second. Then he stared at the number printed near the bottom of the page. You borrowed against the house? He asked. I nodded. Only once. For my final year? Yes. Ethan looked genuinely stunned. The expression on his face reminded me of when he was 8 years old and discovered that adults were not as strong as they appeared. Why would you do that? He asked. The answer seemed obvious to me. It always had. Because you had earned your place there. Ethan lowered the document. His eyes were beginning to tell a different story than the one he arrived with that afternoon. Not anger. Not yet. Something deeper. Something quieter. Regret. He looked around the garage again. Around the shelves. Around the house. Then back at the box. All these years, he said softly. I thought I knew exactly what happened. Nobody answered him. There was nothing to add. Because sitting in front of him were not opinions. They were not memories distorted by time. They were records. Photographs. Receipts. Notes. Evidence. And for the first time, Ethan seemed to understand that the version of me he had been carrying for years was beginning to fall apart under the weight of the truth. The sun had nearly disappeared by the time Ethan set the last document aside. The garage felt cooler now. The golden light from earlier had faded into the soft gray of evening. Nobody seemed eager to leave. The errands Vanessa had mentioned hours ago were forgotten. The box sat open between us like a witness that had finally decided to speak. Ethan rubbed his hands together and stared at the stack of papers on his lap. There is something I do not understand, he said quietly. I waited. If all of this happened, why did I grow up believing something completely different? The question settled heavily in the space between us. I did not answer immediately. Not because I lacked an answer. Because there were too many answers. Some happened gradually. One conversation at a time. One assumption at a time. One misunderstanding at a time. Ethan looked toward Vanessa. Do you remember what you used to tell me? Vanessa's expression remained calm. About what? About Mom. She looked away briefly. I said a lot of things over the years. You said she never helped. Silence. You said she always put herself first. More silence. You said she cared more about money than family. Vanessa folded her arms. That was based on what I observed. Ethan glanced down at the documents. Observed. His voice remained controlled. Quiet. That worried me more than anger would have. These papers tell a different story. Vanessa immediately replied. Papers do not tell the whole story. Ethan nodded slowly. Maybe not. Then he lifted one of the tuition statements. But they tell part of it. Nobody spoke. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a dog barked. A porch light switched on. Across the street, evening was settling over everything. Ethan leaned back in the folding chair. Do you remember Thanksgiving 6 years ago? He asked suddenly. Vanessa looked surprised. What about it? Mom invited us. Vanessa shrugged. We already had plans. Ethan stared at the floor. I I remember thinking she was trying to make us feel guilty. Another silence followed. Then another memory surfaced. I could see it happening, one after another, like old photographs appearing in a developing tray. Christmas 3 years later, Ethan said quietly. You told me she only wanted us there because she was lonely. Vanessa's jaw tightened. She was lonely. Maybe she was. Ethan looked at me. But that does not mean she was selfish. For years I had imagined what it might feel like if my son finally saw me clearly again. I expected relief, satisfaction, some sense of victory. Instead I felt mostly sad, because every realization arriving now was arriving years late. Ethan stood and walked a few steps toward the open garage door. The evening breeze moved through the yard. He looked older somehow, older than he had that morning. How many times did I choose not to call? He asked quietly. The question was directed at nobody, or maybe at himself. How many times did I assume the worst? Vanessa remained silent. Ethan turned back toward the box, then toward me. His eyes stopped on a photograph near the top of the pile, one he had not examined yet. Slowly, he picked it up. The moment I saw it, my breath caught. It was not a receipt, not a payment record, not a financial document. It was something far more dangerous. Because unlike numbers, this photograph captured a conversation, a moment, a truth that could not be explained away. Ethan studied the image for several seconds. Then his expression changed completely. And for the first time all evening, Vanessa looked genuinely worried. The photograph was slightly bent at one corner. Ethan stared at it for several seconds before turning it over. The date on the back immediately caught his attention. This was 6 months before our wedding, he said quietly. Vanessa glanced at the photograph and looked away almost as quickly as she had looked at it. So, she asked. Ethan did not answer right away. He was studying the image carefully. I remembered it well. A small coffee shop downtown. Rain tapping against the windows. Vanessa sitting across from me. Both of us smiling politely. A simple meeting that had seemed insignificant at the time. Ethan looked from the photograph to Vanessa. Why were you meeting Mom alone? Vanessa shrugged. I do not remember. The answer arrived too quickly. Ethan noticed. So did I. You do not remember? He asked. It was years ago. Ethan slowly lowered the photograph. Then something else slipped from behind it and landed on the folding table. A folded piece of paper. Small, worn, forgotten. I felt my stomach tighten the moment I saw it. Ethan unfolded it carefully. His eyes moved across the page, then stopped. What is it? Vanessa asked. Ethan did not answer. He kept reading. The paper was an email, printed years ago and folded into the photograph without my knowledge. At the top was Vanessa's name. Below it was a message she had sent me 2 days after our meeting. Ethan read it silently at first. Then he looked up. Mom. His voice sounded different now. Did you keep this? I shook my head. I forgot it even existed. Ethan looked back down at the page. The email was short. Only a few paragraphs. But every word mattered. Thank you for meeting with me today. I feel better after talking. Ethan is lucky to have a mother who cares so much. I hope one day we can be as close as you and Ethan are. I am grateful you welcomed me into your family. The garage became completely silent. Ethan read the message again. Then a third time. Vanessa folded her arms. That does not prove anything. Ethan slowly looked up. It proves you felt differently back then. People change. Yes, Ethan said quietly. They do. Then he returned his attention to the email. At the bottom was another detail. A forwarded message attached beneath the original. I watched his expression change as he read it. The attachment was from my old friend Linda. Ethan knew her. She had lived 3 houses down from us for nearly 20 years. The forwarded note was brief. Vanessa, your future mother-in-law has spent half her life making sacrifices for Ethan. He may never know the full story, but he is lucky to have her. Ethan stared at the screen printout, then at Vanessa, then back at the page. You knew, he said softly. Vanessa said nothing. Years ago, you already knew. More silence. The evening air felt heavier now. Not because anyone was raising their voice. Because the picture was becoming clearer. Ethan had spent the entire afternoon uncovering proof that his mother loved him. But this was different. This was proof that someone else had known it too. Long before the distance began. Long before the misunderstandings. Long before the version of me he eventually came to believe. Ethan carefully placed the email beside the photographs and receipts. Then he leaned back in the folding chair and stared into the darkness beyond the garage door. For several seconds nobody moved. Finally he spoke. If you knew all of this back then, he said quietly, looking directly at Vanessa. When exactly did the story change? The question lingered in the garage long after Ethan asked it. When exactly did the story change? Vanessa did not answer immediately. She looked toward the driveway, then toward the open box, then back at Ethan. For the first time that evening, she seemed unsure of what to say next. Ethan remained calm. That was what made the moment feel so heavy. He was no longer arguing. He was evaluating, comparing memories against evidence, comparing assumptions against facts. People grow apart, Vanessa finally said. Sometimes relationships become complicated. Ethan nodded slowly. That is true. His voice remained steady. But that is not what I asked. Silence. Vanessa folded her arms tighter. I do not know what you want me to say. Ethan looked at the photographs spread across the table. The truth would be a good start. Nobody spoke for several seconds. The garage felt smaller now. Years of conversations seemed to be gathering around us. Conversations I had never heard. Opinions I had never been present to answer. Ethan picked up the email again. 9 years ago, you thanked Mom for welcoming you into the family. Vanessa said nothing. You told her I was lucky to have her. Still nothing. Linda told you the same thing. Ethan carefully placed the email back on the table. So somewhere between then and now, something changed. Vanessa finally looked directly at him. You are making this sound intentional. Ethan leaned back in the folding chair. Was it not? The question landed heavily. Vanessa immediately shook her head. No. Then help me understand. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. You only heard one side of things tonight. Ethan almost laughed. One side. He gestured toward the photographs. The receipts. The tuition statements. The loan documents. These are not stories. These are records. Vanessa looked frustrated now. Your mother is not perfect. I smiled faintly. Nobody is. Ethan glanced at me, then back at her. Nobody said she was. The distinction mattered. For years, the conversation had always been about flaws. Small mistakes. Missed moments. Imperfections. But the box had changed the conversation completely. Now it was about intent. About character. About whether the picture he carried of his mother had ever been accurate in the first place. Ethan stood and walked a few steps toward the driveway. The night air was cool. Porch lights glowed up and down the street. Finally, he spoke again. Do you remember how many times I skipped holidays? Vanessa remained silent. How many invitations I ignored? More silence. How many times I assumed Mom was being selfish when she was just trying to stay connected? His voice was still calm, but now there was pain underneath it. Real pain. The kind that arrives when someone realizes they cannot recover lost years. Vanessa lowered her eyes. I never told you to stop loving your mother. Ethan nodded. No, he turned toward her. You did not have to. That sentence changed everything. Because it was true. Influence rarely arrives as a direct instruction. Sometimes it arrives one comment at a time. One suggestion at a time. One assumption repeated often enough that it begins to feel like fact. Vanessa looked away. Ethan looked exhausted. Then he returned to the table and stared at the photographs one last time. The box had started the day as a collection of forgotten memories. Now it looked more like a timeline, a record of who his mother had actually been. And standing there beneath the garage light, Ethan finally seemed ready to face the possibility that the person he had misunderstood all these years was not me. The garage had gone completely quiet. The kind of quiet that only comes after something important has finally been said. Ethan remained standing beside the table, looking down at the photographs, receipts, notes, and emails scattered across its surface. The evidence had not arrived all at once. It had arrived piece by piece, hour after hour, until the picture became impossible to ignore. Vanessa sat silently near the corner of the garage. She no longer seemed interested in explaining anything. There was nothing left to explain. Ethan slowly picked up the sealed envelope he had found beneath everything else. What is this? He asked. His voice sounded tired. I recognized the envelope immediately. For a moment, I considered asking him not to open it. Not because I was afraid of what it said, because I knew exactly what it said, and because some truths hurt more than lies. It is a letter, I said quietly. I wrote it years ago. Ethan turned it over. My handwriting covered the front. His name. Nothing else. Why did you never send it? He asked. I smiled faintly. At first, I thought the timing was wrong. Then too much time passed. Ethan carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single folded page. The paper had softened with age. He unfolded it and began reading. The garage remained silent except for the occasional sound of traffic in the distance. I remembered the night I wrote that letter. I had been sitting alone at my kitchen table after another short phone call. One of many. Ethan had sounded distracted. Busy. Far away. Not angry. Not cruel. Just absent. I had spent an hour staring at my coffee before finally putting my thoughts on paper. As Ethan read, I watched his expression slowly change. The letter contained no accusations. No complaints. No attempts to defend myself. It simply said the things I had never found the right moment to say. I told him I was proud of the man he had become. I told him that every sacrifice had been worth it. I told him that parents rarely need recognition. They only hope their children find happiness. I told him that if life ever became busy enough to pull us apart, he should never mistake distance for a lack of love. Most importantly, I told him that no matter how much time passed, he would always be my son. Ethan reached the final paragraph and stopped reading. His eyes remained fixed on the page. For several seconds he did not move. Then he folded the letter carefully and stared at the envelope in his hands. "You never blamed me," he said softly. I shook my head. "No, even after all those years." "No," Ethan lowered his head. The emotion on his face was impossible to miss now. Not because he was dramatic. Because he was honest. He looked like a man confronting every missed opportunity at once. Every ignored invitation. Every phone call never returned. Every assumption he had accepted without question. Finally, he looked up. "I am sorry, Mom." The words were simple, quiet, real. I nodded. There was nothing else he needed to say. Some apologies become smaller when people try to explain them. This one did not need explanation. Ethan stepped closer and looked around the garage one final time. Then he picked up the very first photograph he had found that afternoon. The photograph that started everything. He smiled sadly. "None of these changed the truth," he said. "They just helped me see it." I looked at my son and realized something important. The photographs had not repaired our relationship. The receipts had not repaired it either. Not even the letter. What repaired it was his willingness to finally look. To question. To listen. To see. And standing there beneath the old garage light, surrounded by decades of memories, I felt something I had not felt in many years. My son had finally come home.